as of now, please don't blame me for anything that happens. My
It's
love.
so unfair. You're always so mean to me.
No, it's a compliment to you.
Hello, Paul. How are
Hello.
you? So I have a confession to make, which I really, really wanted to hate Highlight. I desperately wanted to hate it, and I sort of don't. And I don't after we had a chat backstage, and you spoke to me about why you think the real world is broken.
Yeah.
And what's wrong with the real world that you're trying to fix. So perhaps you could talk us through that a little bit, and then explain what your product does to try and remedy the defects in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I was describing it is that if you look at what's happened in the online world over the last 5 or 10 years, I think a few things are pretty clear. One is that we love to share. We curate these detailed profiles. We talk about all the things that we enjoy and the things that we've done, and we love learning about other people. And what the web and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and services like that have done is they've just made it dramatically easier to share and to learn about people using the web. In the real world, in the physical world, all of those same instincts exist. We wear T-shirts of our favorite bands and sweatshirts of the schools we've been to and hats of our favorite sports teams, and we care deeply about how we dress and how we present ourselves, and we love to people watch. I think the example I was giving is that if I'm sitting down in a cafe and the woman near me happens to know my sister who lives in London, that's great. That'd be really interesting to know. But I am never going to know that because we just don't have the tools. I mean, in the real world, we just live in these cities full of strangers. We walk by each other on the street every day. We sit down next to each other. We look around, and we don't know anything about anyone, and that's really weird.
Right. So you're somebody who thinks the real world is weird.
I think you could make the argument, and it's not a perfect argument, but you could make the argument that the web is a reflection of how we would want the world to be if we had designed it. And
maybe how you would want it to be. I don't know about if it's how I would want it to be.
And I mean that if you look at the way I was describing it, I think I said that the real world is kind of like a bizarre version of Facebook where every profile is just a single photo. And as we go about our day, we're browsing this terrible version of Facebook or LinkedIn. If LinkedIn were like the real world.
It's the most fucking terrifying thing I've ever heard.
If LinkedIn were like the real world, it would be a collection of millions of profiles where every profile is just a single page. And it's no words, no names, just a blank photo and a message button, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And if I wanted to find an iOS engineer or a small business accountant, I would have to randomly message people and say, pardon me, is there any chance you happen to be a small business accountant? Nope, sorry about that. Pardon me, ma'am, is there any, I mean, it's so bad and terrible and awful and broken, you can't even imagine using it, and that's the way the real world is, and it always has been, and all of a sudden, we have technology that it's completely changing what's possible. I mean, imagine if you can walk into a room and you can look around at anyone, and just by looking at someone, you can know all about them. You can know their name and where they work and all the friends you have in common with them. And you can have something that surfaces the more interesting connections around you wherever you go. Like, that woman over there actually knows your mother. And that girl likes all the same obscure authors that you like. And your friend's on the other side of the wall right now. And I just know, that in the future, this is just going to exist. And we're going to look back on it and say, I can't believe we didn't used to have that. I can't believe we used to walk around blind, not knowing anything about anyone. Like, how do we know who to talk to when we had a question about something? How do we know who spoke our language when we were visiting a foreign city? How do we know what our friends were next door? How do we get by and navigate our day? Yeah. I mean, just like we do with cell phones today, right? We say, what did we do before we could instantly magically talk to anyone in the world? How do we coordinate and meet up? And I can't believe that was just 10 years ago.
That's one of the things I love about technology entrepreneurs. It takes a special sort of psychology to look at the world
as a nice way to put it.
Broken system with kind of faulty architecture that you want to remedy. It's fantastic. Okay, tell us how you're fixing it.
Yeah. So what I described is what we want to build at Highlight, and it's still really, really basic. I mean, the way it works is you install the app and you sign in with Facebook, and that's it. It says, great, Highlight's now activated. We'll let you know when there's someone interesting nearby. In the meantime, close the app and go do something fun. And the core concept is that if you're standing near me and you've installed the app, then if your privacy settings allow for it, your profile will show up on my phone. And I can see your photos, so I know it's you. I can see your full name. I can see where you work. I can see all the friends that we have in common. I can see all the other stuff we have in common, like if we went to the same school or we're from the same hometown or we like a lot of the same bands. And here's the craziest part. I can see a history of all the times that we've crossed paths before.
That's terrifying.
And if I'm walking down the street and Highlight sees someone particularly interesting walk near me, it'll notify me.
How does it know who's interesting?
That's a really good question, yeah.
So I find lots of people interesting, but
Yeah.
I can't imagine how an algorithm would ever be able to tell me who I
Yeah.
would find interesting.
It starts off, you can start off with a really, I mean, the way we view it is that anytime two phones are near each other, the app has some decisions to make.
Yeah.
Are these two people relevant enough that their profiles should show up on each other's phones? If so, what fields should we surface, and should we send a notification? And you can start with a really simple set of rules underlying that, but ultimately, those decisions should be deeply informed by the context.
Yeah.
And so initially, it's things like, are we friends? If not, do we have a bunch of friends in common? Do we have a bunch of other things in common? If so, are the things that we have in common particularly interesting? Have we crossed paths in this place before? Because if I'm your roommate or your coworker, you probably don't want to get notified about me every day, right?
Right.
But really, there's so much context that you have that you can use to make this a better experience. You could look at things like, is it daytime or nighttime? Is this person at work, or are they
So I find
out? Or
so would I find different people interesting at different times of day?
absolutely, absolutely. And in different places, you'd find different people interesting.
Yeah.
And think about the combinations of
And
those.
you're trying to work out how that works.
Yeah, we want it to be like the keypad on the iPhone or the Google search box, in the sense that to the user it just works. Like, you shouldn't have to think about what the radius should be or what the rules should be or how many friends you have to have in common to trigger notification. It should just work. But under the hood, there's all this math going on that just makes it better and better and better.
It's an interesting engineering challenge.
It's
an
a fascinating
interesting
engineering
UI
challenge, and
because
big data challenge, and social
I
engineering.
mean, it sounds like the most annoying thing in the world. I mean, I'm walking down, I think, oh, my phone's going. Okay, fine. No, it's not a text. It's just telling me that Lindsay in Starbucks might be interesting to me. Well, she fucking isn't. I've got to get to a meeting.
Yeah, false positives are annoying, right?
Right, but I mean, how do you sort of scale up and scale down notifications, and how do you deal with it? Because notifications, you're kind of under the aegis of whatever operating system that you're running under, right?
Yeah.
So you have a lot of quite difficult challenges here.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, you basically start with a simple set of assumptions, and it just gets more sophisticated and better over time. And so you can do basic things like, throttling. Don't send more than X notifications per day. You can do day part throttling. Then you can look at response rates, and you can see, this person wants to get lots of notifications because they keep responding to everyone. This person doesn't. And I think ultimately, if we're successful, it moves from being more of a push-based experience to more of a pull-based experience.
Okay, so you find that some people become sort of promiscuous meeters, and they want to go out and meet everybody that might conceivably be
That's
interesting
actually a
to
really interesting point. Like, we don't think highlights about meeting people. I think it's a really natural thing to ask, and I think most people assume that it is, but I think that our philosophy is that most of the time you're not really in a mode where you want to meet people. You're busy, you're doing stuff, you're going about your day, and if it does lead to meeting people, that's fantastic, but it doesn't, you don't have to do that to get value out of it. I think the way we view it is that it's really about surfacing metadata and helping you see things about people that you've never been able to see before. So imagine you could walk into this room and look at anyone and just see that one pager floating above their head. I mean, if there's a connection that's so compelling that you want to walk up and talk to the person or message them, then great, you should do that. But you can get a whole lot of value out of LinkedIn without messaging people.
Yep.
You can get a whole lot of value out of Facebook without messaging people. It's context. So that's sort of how we view it. I mean, another way of thinking about it is, imagine if everyone in the world were just a gray dot, and that's the way the world was. Then all of a sudden you switch to the world of today where you could see people and you could see what they looked like and what gender they were and what age they were and what clothes they were wearing, and you had all this additional context that you could infer. I think what we want to build with Highlight is sort of the next order of magnitude up from that.
So this is real sci-fi movie stuff. I mean, eventually when you're embedded in my temple, and I wander around, a conference like this, I'm going to be looking at people, and it's going to sort of pop up information about how I'm connected to them and what their interests are, and whether I might like to write about that person, or whether I should really avoid that person.
Yes.
How do you deal with? Do you deal with it yet, and do you plan to with people that you should not meet and that you're not interested in?
I mean, the thing about this...
Because the app I really want is the one that tells me how to avoid the creepy person in the drinks party, right? It's like, this guy is going to pitch me. I do not want to hear from him. He's a weird, creepy person. Everybody else on the Highlight or whatever it's called at that point has kind of registered him as a weirdo. Yeah. Like, how do you help me in that situation? Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it absolutely should. I mean, LinkedIn, you can it informs your judgment of people positively or negatively, right? And I think this is similar, where
it should give you context and it should help inform how you act. I mean, so this whole space, these questions about what are the edge cases and what happens if this person shows up and, they've been dating your girlfriend, or, I mean, there are all these like edge cases that you could dig into, and the reality is, like, yes, we're figuring out what these are.
Yeah.
What we were talking about before was, I was comparing it to when the web came out. When the web came out, it was like this entirely new dimension that had never existed before. We called it cyberspace. I think that's the most compelling fact there. I mean, we called it cyberspace and the information superhighway, and for the first time in the world, you could chat with someone on the other side of the globe, which was crazy. And I could put up a web page, and my cousin in Germany could see it, which was nuts. And we had to figure out what we wanted to do with this thing. Like, what should the etiquette be in chat rooms? And do we call this a website or a net site? And is it just weirdos that use the internet? And will this thing ever be used for commerce? I mean, we really asked, will this thing ever be used for commerce? Which seems ridiculous in retrospect. But over time, we figured it out. And it's become extremely mainstream. And it's changed the world. And I think we're at a very special time in history right now where you have these 4 or 5 technology trends that are all heading at the same time. So smartphones are just now becoming ubiquitous. Facebook and online identity systems are just now becoming ubiquitous. We can just now run mobile apps in the background. We got that from Apple in late 2010. We can just now do push notifications properly. Battery life is just now at the point where it's good enough, and it's only going to get better. Location accuracy is just now at the point where it's good enough, and it's only going to get better. And what these are combining to allow is this new publishing space, the air above our heads. And that's never existed before, and it's a really, really big deal. And so it's going to take us a while to figure this out. And another thing I was talking about, I was getting coffee with this woman a little while ago, and her highlight popped up and said that this guy was nearby. And so she looked around and she said, I think that's him at that table over there. And I looked at his picture on my phone. I'm like, yep, I think that's him. I think he's wearing the same jacket. And so she messaged him in the app and said, nice yellow sunglasses, because he had these yellow sunglasses on his head. And we were sort of waiting for him to take his phone out and look at it. He was in a business meeting, and we're looking out the corners of our eyes. And then 4 or 5 minutes later, he casually takes his phone out and looks around, and we wave and smile. And, and he was a really nice guy. He was in town for the day from LA, and he heard about it down there. And, is it okay to do that? Is it okay to message people like that? And she said someone else had messaged her and highlighted and said, hey, say hi to your coworker Ken for me. He's a good friend of mine. I hope it's cool that I said that. Because we're trying to figure out what the norm should be.
Right.
But that's why it's fun and exciting and different and new. And we're just at the beginning of this really important shift in the way we socialize and interact in the physical world, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice thing to say that we're working out the norms, but isn't it right that most of the businesses that are providing the mechanisms for us to work out those norms have a vested interest in keeping us on their platforms and becoming sticky and becoming addictive, in A/B testing furiously so that people use their products compulsively, so you can serve up ads, whatever. It's okay to say that these things are evolving and that the norms are becoming established.
Right.
But you're pretty much in control of, in some ways, in how that evolves. And don't you have a vested interest in making the norm to share as much as possible, to communicate as much as possible, to be involved as much as possible?
That's a really interesting question. I think that the companies have an incentive to build a product that people love and that people want to use often. And I think that.
Now, people love and want to use cocaine often. It doesn't necessarily mean that
I know,
they should.
yeah, the second, touche. The second part of what I was going to say is that you have an incentive to build a product that people want to use often. And I think that the second part is that, you can build a product that you think makes the world better, or you could build a product that you think makes the world worse. And I think that what we're trying to do, if you do this the right way, we think it just makes the world so much better. We're hearing so many stories from people. It's still so basic, and there's so many things we need to improve, and we're just a tiny % of where we want to be. But the stories that we're already hearing are just amazing. I mean, people, these random connections that the app is surfacing. That people are. One woman told me she's interviewed 10 job candidates because of it, and people are talking about these long lost connections that are popping up, and their friend from Brazil was a block away, and they had no idea. In our office.
Tell me your favorite lovely story from
one that I think is, it's probably not my favorite, but it's one that's sort of indicative of the impact that this has on the way people act is, in our office when we moved in, there were 3 different companies working there, and they're all really nice, but everyone there is great, but when you don't work with people, you don't really get to know them well, and so people sort of, you meet them on day 1 and you forget each other's names 2 minutes later. For the next couple of months, you walk by each other in the hallway and sort of nod hello, but you don't want to ask them their name again because you're supposed to know it by then, and people just sort of kept to themselves, and then people started getting on Highlight, and it's completely changed the culture. People smile more, they talk more, they're friendlier. I know everyone's name, and it's surfaced all of these crazy connections. Like this one guy who I'd never even spoken with before, he's awesome, and I talk to him all the time now, and it turns out he was really good friends after college in Texas with this girl who grew up riding horses with my wife when she was 15 in San Diego. And another guy in the office messaged me and said, hey, how do you know Jamie so-and-so? And I said, I met him at a tech conference a few years back, and we kept in touch. And he said, he used to be my high school Spanish teacher. I didn't even know he was in tech. And I think that there's all this unlocked potential in the world to not to necessarily meet people, but to connect more. And how many times have you been on a plane with someone and it's a 6-hour flight and 2 people are just staring straight ahead for the first 5 hours, and then towards the end of the flight, one guy goes, so what do you do? And an hour later, they're best friends, and they have all these things in common, and they're exchanging cards, and
kind of cool if you could skip over that initial
yeah,
period and just get down
exactly.
to enjoying the flight.
And seeing friends in common and seeing these random connections in common, it gets you over that friction, and it makes the world a smaller place, and it creates all this empathy, and all these people that you see, like, you can walk out on the street and see someone who's from a different generation, a different culture, and it seems like you might have nothing in common with them, and maybe you don't, but everyone has a story, right? Everyone has something interesting about them that you might want to know, and when you can surface those things in a lightweight, ambient way, it just makes life better, and so it's, we have a long way to go, but it's something that we're so excited to just try and build and contribute to the world, and to think about going to other countries and seeing people use this, and hearing the stories and the emails we get, and to be able to say we made that, and it's just a fun thing to be working on.
I think that's a good note to end on. It's clear. Yeah. It's clear to me you do think this is a way to make the world better, and we can.
We've got a long way to go.
We'll be discussing that at length, depending on how well you do over the next 10 years. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.